Okay, you are in broadcast.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have the pleasure to chair this session, which is rather important because it deals with the integration of renewables and nuclear, two kinds of technologies, CO2-free, according to all the international assessments, which by principle should be considered when a country has to tackle the very challenging issue of decarbonizing the power generation, especially in a context of full decarbonization of our economies, which is the goal of all the international commitments for the long-term energy strategies of all development countries. Whatever will be the final date when this incredible achievement will be get, either 2050 or 2060 or whatever, that achievement is really challenging. In my view, but also in the view of the authors, as I have had the opportunity to read on the summaries, integrating nuclear and renewables is not only possible but also convenient. But we will listen to this directly from their voice. So I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Otaka Minatomoto. He will present the achievement of his work. He is a co-author of a paper, which title is an analysis of electricity decarbonization in Japan with nuclear and renewable by long-term optimal power generation mix model, considering nuclear fuel cycle. So I give certainly the floor to Otaka Minatomoto, and I recall him that he should try to stay within 20 minutes, so we can dedicate a further 10 minutes to possible questions. Please, Mr. Minatomoto, you have the floor.
Okay, can I start the presentation?
Please, you can start.
Can you see the slides?
We can see the slides.
Okay.
Please, go ahead, we see it.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Hotaka Minatomoto from Fuji Komiyama Laboratory of the University of Tokyo. And this is my presentation for AIEE. And my research is about an analysis of the decarbonization of electricity by the long-term optimal power generation mix model for Japan, considering the nuclear fuel cycle. And first of all, I explain about the nuclear fuel cycle. The nuclear fuel cycle is a flow of nuclear fuel utilization as shown in the following flow, which has not been put to practical use at present in Japan. On the other hand, from the perspective of effective utilization of uranium and plutonium, there are expectations for the future. Among these are the fast reactor cycle and the light water reactor cycle, and the LWR cycle in particular is sometimes referred to as a pull thermal cycle. Currently, only light water reactors exist in Japan, so it is hoped that the lower cycle will be commercialized soon. Next, I'll explain the current situation in Japan. There are 9 nuclear reactors in operation in Japan, and 4 of them are plutonium thermal reactors. There are 19,000 tons of spent fuel in Japan, which is 78% of the capacity. Reprocessing plants and other facilities are not in full-scale operation. The reprocessing plant is to be built in Rokkasho village in Japan. And some of the plutonium has been shipped to the other countries. Most of it is in the UK and France. Some of it is coming back to Japan as MOX fuel. Next, I will explain the treatment of the nuclear fuel cycle in the basic energy plan in Japan. In the basic energy plan, 3E plus S is listed as the basic principle. In addition to that, the advanced 3E plus S is required in Japan. In the text, the goals are set to increase energy diversity and self-sufficiency, and decarbonization is cited as a major issue. The nuclear fuel cycle will basically be promoted, and it is expected to help solve energy problems. In the LWR cycle, the goal is have no extra plutonium, and there is a need to study the management and use of plutonium. In the report, the future of the fast breeder reactor Monju, which has built in Japan, is discussed, including the decommissioning of the reactor and the use of its findings in the future. And this is the summary. The urgent need to decarbonize and improve self-sufficiency calls for the development of a nuclear power backend and the need for a model that includes a nuclear fuel cycle in future energy strategies. Next, I would like to talk about my research. In line with the 3E plus S philosophy, I will consider the optimal power supply configuration for Japan, including the nuclear fuel cycle. The model in my research is made as follows. The objective is to calculate the optimal operation by minimizing the sum of these costs. By combining the model of the nuclear fuel cycle with a model that aims to optimize the energy mix in Japan, I aimed to refer to the competitiveness of the nuclear fuel cycle in Japan and the necessity of fast breeder reactors and so on. Facilities about nuclear fuel cycle. This is a rough structure of the model. Input data is load curve and cost data, running price, and so on. And I set the constraints about efficiency or upper limits, and output data are a power generation mix and the plutonium balance and the capacity of the plants and so on. The formula is as follows. The overall objective function is the sum of the present values of the costs as described earlier, and each cost is divided into 3 categories: fixed costs such as construction costs, operations costs of the facility, and variable costs proportional to the amount of electricity generated. In this calculation, in order to make the calculation for the next 100 years more accurate, and a calculation for 120 years was performed to reduce the influence of the terminal effect. One of the main features of this model is that it takes into account the hourly fluctuations in supply and demand at the formula of 7. It is aimed to correctly evaluate the economic efficiency of solar and wind power based in their variability. Here are some of the important assumptions made in the calculations. In this calculation, it is assumed to zero carbon dioxide emissions in 2050. This means that thermal power is not used. This is based on the assumption that zero emissions in the power generation sector should be achieved as early as possible, referring to one of the targets in Japan. The following is a list of costs for various power generation methods. The table on the left shows the construction costs and the ratio of the operation and management cost to the construction cost. The cost of solar and battery power are assumed to decrease as the technology evolves, $5 per year and $0.5 per year. And the table on the right shows the fuel costs. The table on the right shows assuming 2% annual increase in the price of uranium and 0.5% increase in the price of oil and coal. Under these assumptions, the operation of the power source with the lowest cost in Japan is calculated. First, I will explain about the capacity of the equipment. The installed capacity of nuclear power is about 120 gigawatts, and wind power is dominant among renewable energies. In the details of nuclear reactors by reactor type, advanced light water reactors called LWR are dominant. On the other hand, the amount of FBR is increasing in the latter half of the year. Next is the amount of electricity generated. Most of the power is generated by nuclear power plants with high operating rates. The dominance of advanced LWRs in nuclear power generation is the same as it in capacity. In the next section, I will explain the balance of electricity supply and demand for one month, January in 2040, 2080, and 2120. Here is the supply demand balance for 1 month, January 2040. The solid line shows the electricity demand. Nuclear power and coal-fired power are the main power sources used. Coal-fired power is used to respond to fluctuations in demand by adjusting its output. Next, let's look at the year 2080. Nuclear power accounts for most of the electricity generated, and the introduction of batteries will allow us to respond to change in demand. This result is obtained because a hypothetical limit of the number of times nuclear power can follow the load is given, 0.3 times per day. And finally, here are the results for the year after 100 years. Because the cost of solar energy is much lower, it will be introduced more than before. Solar power will be generated during the daytime, and it will be limited to no more than a surplus. In this example too, batteries are used to cope with changes in supply and demand balance. Looking at the cost trends of the nuclear power, the cost of uranium is not significant in the total costs, and the construction cost of nuclear reactors dominates the total costs. Since the lifetime of the reactor is assumed to be 40 years, the cost moves periodically in response. This can be seen in the amount of new construction. And here, it is calculated on a unit cost of power generation for each generation method, taking the total amount of power generated and the total costs. The results as follows. The unit cost of nuclear power is relatively low, and it's not easily affected by fuel costs. Despite the low cost of solar power, the amount of solar power installed is low. Hydropower, which is expensive to build, was not newly constructed. In particular, the reasons for the lack of adoption of solar power are thought to be as follows. It is dependent on hourly fluctuations, and so it cannot fully respond to our demand fluctuations when it is introduced in large quantities. Unlike wind power, the supply of solar power is highly time variant with little regional difference. In addition, compared to the current spent fuel in Japan, the amount of both storage and high-level waste would be considerably higher under this scenario. FBRs, which do not have an upper limit of the amount of MOX fuel used, are introduced in large quantities and consume a large amount of MOX fuel. The amount of plutonium in storage may decrease accordingly. This suggests that the use of MOX fuel is effective in reducing the plutonium stockpile. And here is a summary. These results show that it will make a big difference compared to the current situation, and that it will be difficult for solar power to be introduced in large quantities. As a third line, although PV power generation had the lowest unit cost, it has not been massively adapted, probably because the amount of power generated depends on the amount of sunlight incident and is highly time dependent. And the amount of high-level radioactive waste has increased greatly to 2,000 tons in 100 years, and it is necessary to select a site for disposal in practical terms. And these are my goals for the future, and technologies related to nuclear power, such as the economic evaluation of hydrogen production using with high temperature gas-cooled reactors, which is called HTGRs, should be introduced into the model, and I'm trying them now. I also believe that CCUS technology must be considered in the quest for a low carbon society. Based on these considerations, and this is believe that, and I believe that, and the analysis should continue. And I should take into account the CCUS technologies in this model. Thank you for your attention, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minatomoto. If anybody of those attending this session are curious and they want to put any question, they can write it in the chat, and I will read it and pose the question to the speaker. For the moment, if I may, I have one question for you. If you can elaborate a little bit more on what you said in the conclusions. You stated that though the cost, the LCE, the generation cost of photovoltaic is very low, nevertheless, there is not, in your model, there is not a massive use of photovoltaic. And you wrote in your conclusions, probably because. Could you please elaborate a bit more on this? I mean, if you are looking for the lowest cost mix, and your result is that you simply use photovoltaic when the sun is shining, and you find that it is more convenient to use mostly nuclear power, I think that you have an explanation, which is exactly what you say, probably. Can you be more assertive in this? Probably for us means perhaps yes, perhaps no. We would like to read something more clear than simply probably.
First, I want to talk about the data and PV and wind profile. This is used in this model. The PV profile is changed hourly in this model, and the wind profile changes too. But PV profile is moved 0 to 1, and it is 0 at night, and it is maybe 0.8 at daytime. This change is more effective than wind profile because of this is all same as all regions in Japan, and this change is and in this model we use a load curve at a demand curve hourly. So if the PV introduced large, it is not able to follow the demand curve, and it is necessary to introduce battery or pumped up storage more. So it will be high. This cost will be higher than this result.
Great. I have another question for you. Do you think that this result in a country very much populated with not a large amount of space to be dedicated to renewable power plants, this kind of analysis you have performed, do you think it can be transferred to other countries such as Italy? This is a question or a kind of forecast after your experience. What do you think about this?
Sorry, one more time, please.
No, the point is that you think that this result is peculiar of the situation in Japan, or
Yes.
your opinion is that due to the intermittence, the variability of solar and wind power, nuclear would be a good option everywhere, not only in Japan?
And I set the data as a little higher than other countries in Japan because of social problems. And so maybe the other countries, maybe this costs are lower than in Japan. So maybe it is very useful, one of a useful methods in other countries too. And yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Minatomoto from the floor, from the audience, or from the other speaker, Mrs. Sangl? No, I don't see any question, not even in the chat. So I thank you very much, Mr. Minatomoto. And if Mrs. Sangl is with us, I can give her the floor, but I don't see. Oh no, Minatomoto, but Mrs. Sangl is not yet with us. I asked the organizer, what should we do in this situation?
Yes, I don't know why, but we send an email to Ms. Sangl. So if you want, if Mr. Minatomoto, if you want to say something more, or Mr. Zolino,
Yeah.
you
Okay,
want
we can.
to speak, okay?
Yes, but of course we cannot. I mean, we can try for another 5 minutes, because in this case, I think what we can say would be interesting. But for more than 5 or 10 minutes, I think we will simply bore the audience. However, I have another question for Mr. Minatomoto. In my faculty, in the University of Padua, I am involved in a kind of analysis which is pretty similar to yours. We also are simulating scenarios with an hourly analysis. We consider hour by hour demand and generation. The question is, the PV and wind profile you just showed are the presently recorded profile, or you got them from any database with the forecast of PV and wind generation? I mean, are those profile recorded now in Japan out of the existing plants, or they come from, let's say, extrapolation, analysis, satellite measurement, and whatever? Did you fetch from some database, or they are measured?
This data was from a forecast. So I don't know what to say. This data was from Amedas in Japan. Amedas is called to just a kind of official data in Japan. Official data.
Official data. So they come from the grid, from the real plants. Okay.
Yes.
So they take into account the real situation. I mean, when it is raining, the PV generation is very poor, or when no wind is blowing, the wind generation is zero. It is the real measurement.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question. It is very interesting what you showed. You showed us the situation in 100 or more than 100 years. Okay, you showed us the situation in 2140, which is 120 years ahead from now. How can you estimate the cost of all the technologies involved in your model with such a long forecast? I mean, how can you say what is the cost of battery in 2140?
It's about PVs on the battery get a cost of the PVs on the batteries will get lower, and this and these data are from the one of the exceptions, one of the sorry, I don't know what to say. Sorry.
Okay. Wait, okay. Can you
prediction data? Japanese prediction data of some companies.
Okay, great. But do you remember? It is my curiosity. Do you remember what is the cost of 1 kilowatt-hour in 2100 for the battery?
Yes.
Batteries 2000. What is the figure? I don't see. 100. $100 per kilowatt-hour.
$100 per kilowatt-hour.
This is the figure there.
And it gets lower by minus $0.5 per year.
Minus $0.5 per year. So in 100 years, we should get 50 more or less, yes. $50 per kilowatt-hour.
Yes, and after 100 hours, this is $5, $50 per kilowatt-hour.
So in 2100, you estimate that the cost will be $50 per kilowatt-hour?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that we can again check whether Mrs. Sangl is with us to give her the floor.
Okay, Mr. Giolino, if you want, you can finish because Mrs. Sangl is not coming, so we can stop it. Okay,
okay.
For you?
No problem. For me, it's okay. I just want to say a few words. First, to thank very much Mr. Minato-Moto.
Okay.
Also to encourage all those attending this session or the symposium to let's say carefully consider the results of the analysis Mr. Minato-Moto just presented, because I think that simulating and assessing the optimal mix for the far future, of course, we must discuss now something which will be reality in 40 years or 30 years, is something which is absolutely necessary in order to interpretation. I simply want that Mr. Minato-Moto showed us that the generation cost of photovoltaic is 1/4 or 1/3, 1 to 1/4 of the generation cost of nuclear. And nevertheless, he found that the best mix is with more nuclear than photovoltaic. maybe we can change the boundary conditions to apply this model to other countries, but my feeling is that the outcome won't change very much. Having said this, I can close the session. Thank you for those who attended it, and see you in the next future before 2100, Mr. Minatomoto, I hope. Good evening to everybody.